Today we're going to be talking about the next fight every UFC fighter needs right now. Starting with Paddy Pimblett, the next fight Paddy Pimblett needs is a title elimination bout against Justin Gaethje. I don't know if this is going to happen. From what we've been hearing from Justin Gaethje, he said he's going to retire if he doesn't get a title shot. Well, he's obviously not getting a title shot, but this is the fight that needs to be made. Paddy Pimblett is really not deserving of a title shot against Ilia Topuria. I think it would have happened if it wasn't for Arman Tsarukyan beating Dan Hooker, but now it's pretty clear that Pimblett's probably not going to get the title shot, and he needs one more solid win to really prove himself as a contender for the belt. He had an impressive performance against Michael Chandler, but at the end of the day, that's Michael Chandler. Justin Gaethje is a level up from Michael Chandler, and I think this is a really close fight. I think it could go both ways. But for Ilia Topuria, he needs that fight against Arman, and I think that's the fight that's going to happen in January. You know, Dana White was saying before the Dan Hooker versus Arman Tsarukyan fight, whoever wins this is the number one contender. Arman Tsarukyan beat Dan Hooker, beat him convincingly, and that fight makes perfect sense now. For Charles Oliveira, I think the next fight he needs is a fight against Max Holloway. That's pretty much the last high-profile matchup that Oliveira has against somebody who he hasn't already fought before. Oliveira is not in the position to be fighting for a title right now. He got smoked by Topuria, but he's not in the position to be fighting these no-name contenders. He already had an insanely dominant performance against Gamrot in October. And for Max Holloway just beat Dustin Poirier. But up at welterweight, the next fight Islam Makhachev needs is against Ian Garry. After UFC 322, there was a debate on who's going to fight Islam Makhachev. Is it going to be Michael Morales? Is it going to be Prates? But a week later, Ian Garry just beat Belal Muhammad, and he has a win over Carlos Prates. And the win over Belal Muhammad was a really solid win. I think he clearly beat Muhammad on the feet, and I think he could give Makhachev somewhat of a tough test. And as for Michael Morales and Carlos Prates, I think they should fight each other. That's the obvious fight. They both had really good wins. We were arguing over who should get a title shot. Have them fight each other, and we can figure out who's deserving for the title shot afterwards. Now up at middleweight, I think the next fight Bo Nickal needs is a fight with Paulo Costa. I know a lot of people are hesitant on pushing Bo Nickal up the ranks, giving him a ranked opponent. The last time we gave Bo Nickal a ranked opponent, he got squashed. But that's Reinier de Ridder. Reinier de Ridder is not Paulo Costa. I think Paulo Costa is a much more, honestly, easier matchup for Bo Nickal. And it's also a high-profile matchup. Bo Nickal is a big name. He really is. And I think giving him an opponent like Paulo Costa would be a good move. You know, Paulo Costa, he has decent takedown defense, and he has, decent striking, better than Bo Nickal's last opponent. I think Paulo Costa is the perfect step up in competition for Bo Nickal, and I think it'll end up being a pretty close fight. Now for Israel Adesanya, I think the next fight he should have is Sean Strickland. They're both kind of supposedly washed. They're both coming off of losses. I think this would be a really good rematch to have. A lot of people think this might end up being boring just based off of how they both fight, but I don't think it will be. I think Adesanya is going to go in there and not try to have that fight end up the same way it did before, because that was a pretty bad loss for Adesanya. I think that fight's going to have some bad blood behind it. I think it's going to be really entertaining in the build-up, and I think the fight itself probably will be entertaining as well. I know it's hard to, say a Sean Strickland fight's going to be entertaining. I think this one would actually surprise people. For Alex Pereira, I think his next fight should be the winner versus Cyril Gane versus Tom Aspinall. And honestly, I think Alex Pereira is going to be waiting out most of 2026 for this fight. I don't think Alex Pereira is going to fight any light heavyweight contender right now. They're not going to do a trilogy with Ankalaev. They're not going to do another fight with Jiri. And Carlos Ulberg, I just don't think they're going to make that matchup. I think Carlos Ulberg needs another good win because he's high ranked up, but his last win was against Dominic Reyes. I think that fight's a little too early to make. And for a guy like Alex Pereira, who's kind of on the way out of his career, I think the only option for him is big super fights. I think this is the next fight that will actually happen for Alex Pereira. I think it'll probably happen sometimes towards the end of the year, but that's if Aspinall wins against Cyril Gane. Now, I think Khamzat Chimaev's next fight should be against Nasruddin Imavov. It's not the most exciting fight, but the thing about middleweight, there's not really any exciting fight for Khamzat Chimaev. There's no real big name contender that is also deserving of a title shot. We have big contenders like Du Plessis, we have big contenders like Strickland and Adesanya, but those guys are not anywhere near a title shot. And I think Imavov's the most deserving. He just beat Baralho. He just knocked out Adesanya. I think they're going to make that fight. And based off merit, I think he's the most deserving for that fight to happen. For Volkanovski, I think his next fight should be against Merab. I've been saying this for months now. I think this is the best fight you can make. There's obviously an issue going on in the featherweight division with the UFC where they don't want to make a fight with Volk because Movsar Evelev, they just don't want to give that guy a title shot. He's the clearest, most deserving fighter. I just don't think they want that guy fighting against Volkanovski and risk risk having Volkanovski lose against Mavzar, who isn't the biggest name. And I think the same goes for literally every other contender at featherweight. And you have a guy like Merab, who's wiped out his entire division. He's going to beat Petr Yan. And then who's after that? Maybe an Umar rematch. If he beats Umar in a rematch, there's actually nobody that he hasn't fought that's decently ranked. It's obvious Merab needs something new, and I think that's a perfect fight to make. And honestly, I think it could end up being a pretty close fight. I think Volkanovski would be the favorite going into that fight, but dude, Merab is really good and he has crazy cardio. I think that fight would be an awesome fight, and I think it'd be a super hype fight. I think the fans would like that. Now for Sean O'Malley, I think he should fight Corey Sandhagen. Sandhagen and O'Malley, they're both coming off losses against Merab, and they're both stand-up fighters. They both have good striking. They're both going to stay on the feet most likely. Maybe Corey Sandhagen goes for a takedown, but it's a really good matchup. It's a fresh matchup we haven't seen in bantamweight. You know, we're kind of running out of fresh matchups at bantamweight right now because everybody's fighting each other. You have a dominant fighter like Merab. This is one of the last super high-profile matchups at bantamweight that we haven't seen before. Now for Kamaru Usman, I think he should fight Shavkat Rakhmonov. I think it's pretty obvious Usman is completely not deserving for a title shot against Islam Makhachev. He's coming off of a decent win against Joaquin Buckley. His 3 fights before that are all losses. He lost to Khamzat Chimaev. Fair enough, he took it on short notice. But before that, he lost to Leon Edwards twice. Those losses have aged horribly. I think we should slow the roll on Usman. I think the only people pushing for an Usman title shot against Islam are fighters who are friends with Usman, like Henry Cejudo. That's literally the only people I hear, saying Usman's deserving of a title shot against Makhachev after the Ian Gary performance and after Morales and Prates. I think Kamaru Usman, if he really wants a shot against Islam, he should fight Shavkat for a #1 contenders. Shavkat Rakhmonov's not going to get a title shot. He's been out for almost a year pretty much. That's a really interesting matchup. That's an entertaining matchup. I doubt Usman's going to take that matchup, but I could see him ducking that. But I think that's the fight they both need. I think Shavkat needs another fight, and Usman definitely needs another fight before he gets a title shot. Now for DDP, after his crushing loss against Khamzat Chimaev, he's nowhere near the title shot. But I think they should give him an opponent that tests his grappling. I think they should give him Brendan Allen. I think that's the next fight that DDP needs. He needs to fight another grappler, and Brendan Allen is probably one of the best grapplers in the division. And if not Brendan Allen, then Anthony Hernandez. One of those two guys against DDP, I think is the perfect matchup. Now for Jiri Prochazka, I think the next fight Jiri needs is a fight against Ankalaev. That's a clear fight both of those fighters need. Ankalaev is not going to fight Pereira. Jiri can't fight Pereira either. I think they should both fight each other. And honestly, I think this fight probably will happen, and I think it will happen for an interim belt. I don't think Alex Pereira is going to fight another light heavyweight contender. I think he's going to move up, and I think, he's going to have to leave his belt behind. And I think they're going to do an interim belt between Jiri and Magomed Ankalaev. And I think that's the perfect matchup. That's a fight that hasn't happened before. Now, lastly, for Pantoja, after he fights Joshua Van and after he beats Joshua Van, I think he needs to fight Merab. I know Merab needs to fight Volk, but one of these guys can sit out and wait for a super fight because same scenario. There's nobody at flyweight that's interesting. They're all people that Pantoja's beaten. Maybe if Tetsuo Taira comes up, and wins his fight against Brandon Moreno, that's another fight. But I think a super fight for those two fighters in the lowest divisions is inevitable. I think they both need to go up and test themselves. They're at the point where they're pretty much the GOAT of their division. That's the point where you need to go up and fight for another belt.